So hello, everybody. My name is Russell Galante. If you don't already know me, I am the ornamental extension agent for Oahu and Hawaii Islands. And with me is Hannah Luchin, my counterpart on Maui. We put together these LICH webinars because we're co-editors for the magazine, and we wanted to bring some additional media to you all in the form of webinars, partially to cover a different platform and bring us all together during COVID, and also because we didn't have a conference, we want to allow people to get CEUs throughout the year. So this webinar does have CEUs. I sent that in the email. We have LICH CEUs, 2 LICH CEUs. We have Arborist CEUs, and we also have RUP pesticide applicator certification CEUs for the second part of the webinar. For the little fire ant portion. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you want the CEUs, you have to fill out the post-seminar survey, which I will send out to anybody that's registered on Eventbrite. If you are not registered on Eventbrite with an email, you will not get the survey. So if you aren't registered, go back to Eventbrite and register for the survey. If you don't have the link to that Eventbrite, I will put it in the chat section during the talk. How it goes is we have to prove that you were listening during the webinar. So the survey is also going to have 4 questions, and you have to get at least 3 of them right in order to get the CEU. And you also have to fill out the survey in completion to make sure that we get all of your information for certification numbers, etc. So the questions prompt you pretty clearly. Just make sure that you follow them thoroughly and you answer the survey in order to get those CEUs. If you don't want CEUs, survey, please, because it helps us understand whether or not we're doing a good job with these webinars and to report to the university that we're actually doing something. So I want to turn it over to Hannah to present the first presenter. So over to you, Hannah. Oh, everybody please stay muted until we have question and answers. If you have questions to submit, you can submit them through the chat as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending today. I just wanted to introduce our first speaker, Dr. James Downer. It's an honor having you here today from cold Arizona. But Dr. James Downer has 35 years of experience as a horticulture and plant pathology advisor with the University of California Cooperative Extension in Ventura County. His research focuses on mulch, soil microbiology, disease suppression in mulch soils, diseases of shade trees and other landscape plants, and cultural practices to maintain landscape plants, especially trees. He loves shade trees, working with trees, woodworking, gardening, pruning trees, and he currently works remotely from a small ranch in Portal, Arizona. Without further ado, thank you, James, for being here, and take it away, unless I missed anything.
The host has to enable my screen sharing.
Oh.
Once we get the, while we're getting these.
You're good to go.
Okay, so while we're getting this together, I just want to thank you for the invitation. I love the islands. I have traveled there many times, actually, and usually for meetings, because that way I can kind of afford to come over. But I've been to Hawaii a lot. I've not been to all the islands, but I recognize their diversity. I really appreciate that we and you can get exposure to different points of view through this pandemic we're all stuck in. I think I've talked more broadly to people since we've been locked up than most of the years in my career. Although the pandemic did cut down my international work a bit. But nonetheless, most of my experience has been in California. And so, of course, I don't have a lot of slides of Hawaii. I didn't try to include I didn't try to go back and look for my images of Hawaii just to throw in this talk, because really they don't reflect the research I've done. This presentation usually takes me about 3 hours with Master Gardener audiences. So what I'm doing is really just giving you kind of the take-home points. And you may find some of it a little bit jarring or thought-provoking is another way to look at it, and that it's not conventional wisdom as you may have heard it preached at you before. I have some different ideas, and you'll see as we go through. Almost everything I have to tell you is supported by my research in mulch systems over the last 30 years with my colleague, Dr. Ben Faber, who's a soil scientist with me here in Ventura County. And so we've collaborated on most of these mulch studies over the years. And, you know, the first thing I want to show you is this. That should be music to your ears. I hope you got a blast of chipper like I did. Somebody say yes, I got blasted.
Oh, we missed. I didn't hear it.
Oh, you didn't get the audio?
No,
Oh, dang.
unfortunately.
Well, you saw the branches going in the chipper, right?
No video either.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, that's okay though.
Now?
Yeah, we're not. Yeah, it's not showing.
Sometimes
No?
you have to check the bottom of the screen. It says optimize screen sharing.
Okay, let me see
videos.
where that is. Right now, optimize for video clip.
Yeah,
Okay.
try that.
Dose of it that time?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So that really should be music to your ears. And part of what this is all about is trying to divert thinking from arborists that is a waste product. That stuff going into the chipper truck is the most valuable thing for shade trees that our industry produces. And yet it is also something that is so commonly used as a waste or a byproduct or something you have to get rid of. But the best thing in the world for trees actually is chopped up trees. And I'm going to talk to you about several of the dimensions of using trees. So I'm getting a lot of distracting feedback from unmuted people. Maybe the host can mute all. It's really distracting on my end. Anyway, so we're going to talk about that, and certainly the benefits of arborist chips have to be understood from the beginning. One is that there's no contamination from soil, so we're not worried about moving soil-borne pathogens, although Ohia wilt I think would be a concern where you are because it's in the wood of the tree you're chipping. There are few or no weed seeds other than tree seeds, and these mulches can always be used where they were made. So, you know, the best of all possible worlds, and what I do on my property every single time, is if I have tree work done, the product that they produce from my yard stays in my yard and I utilize it. So mulches made from trees are the best mulching material. There is no better material to mulch trees. And I'm going to tell you also today why in Hawaii you should be using more mulch. If I can get my screen to work here. Okay. So we're going to cover mulch in nature and how mulch is part of a natural system, which I call litter fall. We're going to talk about mulch in landscapes, how it has certain benefits, what modifications to soil it can give you. And then we're going to talk about mulch as a source of pathogens and what is likely and what is not. So probably everybody in high school saw the carbon cycle, and we see that carbon moves through animals and plants, and it's in the soil. The ocean is a huge reservoir of carbon because marine animals make it into coral and calcium bicarbonate, and it precipitates basically in the ocean. So a lot of carbon is in the ocean. A lot of carbon is in the air, and that's where trees are getting the building blocks to make the polymers that make trees. So I've always found that's really kind of interesting that trees come out of thin air or thick air, carbon dioxide air at least. And really the mass that ends up making up trees all comes out of the atmosphere. And finally, the regulation of carbon controls the climate of the planet. So the density of carbon in any of these pools in the carbon cycle is going to determine how our climate works. And we're only now just starting to really understand this. So in Hawaii, you have different islands and they're diverse, and they have areas of low or no. In the case of, the big island, it's like all lava out here in the middle pretty much.
Hey, James.
But yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. Could you try to exit screen share and reshare? We're just
Am I
seeing
lagging?
it's very pixelated, your presentation on our end, but it might help with the.
I think, I don't know if we're going to do much better, because what's happening is I'm having slow internet here for some reason. It's my ISP, and it's probably on my side that this is the problem. So
If you hit share screen again, uncheck the box that says optimize screen sharing for video.
I'll do that.
That should help.
And I need to go back into slideshow mode. So let me do that. And
thank you.
Some of the things we're talking about that make Zoom hard to present on, right?
Well, actually, I can't get the Zoom menu back when I'm in slideshow mode. So let me see. I'm trying to find that optimize button now, and it's not showing. Share screen. This is great. I can't see that button when I'm in slideshow mode, but I can't see it when I'm not in slideshow mode. So
Do you have Windows or Mac?
actually neither. I have Linux.
Okay.
So I don't know how to fix that, you guys.
So you can
Let's see. I can't see the button anymore.
exit out of
You go up.
I'll let you handle it, Hannah.
I'm not sharing, so. Oh, here it is. Okay, it's on that menu. I got it.
Got
All
it.
right. Yeah, it's unclicked. So let me do this again. And it's funny, we've done so many, I have done many Zooms, and nonetheless, something always happens to mess it up. And now, okay, I've shared the wrong talk. Hold on. Oh boy, hold on. I'm sorry, guys.
It looks much better.
I'm not sharing, am I? What are you seeing?
Yep, I see your presentation just in the a side-by-side form. If you just hit share presentation. It was good. It looked great.
I have two similar presentations, and I don't want to share the wrong one. Oh, now that one closed on me. Okay, so here we go. So I don't know how far we got, but I was starting to get into this slide of your islands. You all can see that now?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
So in your islands, you have very different places. You have extremely wet places like Hilo on the Big Island and extremely dry places like north of Kona on the Big Island. And if we look at those areas, I think we all understand, and I certainly appreciate how plants can just erupt out of pure lava, like ferns, and at least initially ferns, and then ohia trees and other things. And it's sort of magical how they can grow in that environment, just growing out of pure rock. So one would think, of course, that organic material really isn't necessary to cultivate plants. And I'm going to try and show you after a while, not why that's wrong, but why organic matter is so important and benefits plantings. So we see here on the left, organic matter content in your islands, and the darkest green is where the highest organic matter is. And you notice that it's also related to the area where the pH is the lowest, where it's most acidic. Now, the effect of VOG notwithstanding, organic matter has quite an ability to change soil reaction or pH. And for the kinds of plants that we may be growing, this is a great thing because they may have acid pH optima. So, you know, if I were going to grow blueberries, for instance, I would want to grow them in these red areas of the island and not in the other areas. So one thing that I want to make very clear is that soils develop based on the climate they are formed in. But no matter what climate you look at, every single soil, whether it's from the desert shown here, says thin humus mineral mixture, but there is a mineral and humus mixture. And so no matter what climate you're in, there is a kind of mulch layer affiliated with the native vegetation. So this propensity to have organic material on the surface is not only natural, it's almost necessary for plants. And in time, that organic material in whatever system we talk about, whether it's Hawaii or Arizona or California redwoods or the Sierras in California, all of these systems develop organic layers on the soil surface. And so how does that carbon then get from the soil surface into the soil to modify it and create this beautiful clod we have with all these colors and textures and roots and fungi growing in it? Well, there's three methods. The tree can deposit carbon in the soil at the root system level. So roots growing through soil, that in itself is depositing carbon and putting carbon into the ground. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. We can also have the saprophytic breakdown, that is microorganisms breaking down the fallen leaves and wood and logs and insects and dead animals and monkey caca or whatever that lands on the soil. And finally, we have deposition of excreted polymers, and polymers are organic molecules containing carbon through the mycorrhizal partners that live on the woody plants that grow in the soil. So at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're following a cycle of energy. And this is where the talk becomes a bit heretical. So pay attention now. We all can understand that sunlight energy comes to the earth and it hits a leaf. And through the magic of photosynthesis in the Palisade mesophyll, we create a 3-carbon sugar, and that gets shunted away as glucose or sucrose, and it ends up in the wood. And it's then stored in the wood as starch, shown here stained purple in the wood of this oak tree that I've taken a picture of. So a fresh wood chip, if it's healthy, is full of stored carbohydrate or energy. And then over time, trees have openings and wounds and get infected, and organisms like this sulfur conch can get in there and start to get at this stored energy and use it up. And over time, the tree eventually dies and it falls down and saprophytes start to eat it. And so we get this end material, humus. And so we're basically going from a high energy situation to a very low energy situation. And by that, I mean that plants are responsible for capturing the energy, storing the energy, and then saprobes or organisms that decay plants take all that energy back and release the carbon dioxide through respiration back into the atmosphere. And you end up with the end product, which is recalcitrant organic matter or humus. The amount of energy in the fresh material, fresh wood chips, is still relatively high. And the amount of material left in a compost, for instance, is very low. So you have to regard fresh plant materials as high energy, composted plant materials as low energy. And by that, I mean energy for microbial work. And this is going to become an important thing shortly here. So forest ecosystems are typically full of organic matter, and they're all over the ground. And it doesn't matter if it's tropical or coniferous, as we show here in Lassen Volcanic National Park. I thought this would resonate with you guys since we have volcanoes in California too. They just don't explode so often. And but when they do, it's a big deal. So here you see a forest, old forest with an amazing amount of organic material. And this is starting to be low energy because the fungi have really had their way with it already. And what we see in our natural settings, in our ecosystems, is that trees in natural settings often grow best and largest where there's water. So we see the big trees in the foreground are growing right by the creek, and it's in a gravelly soil, undisturbed, but heavily mulched by the trees on litter. So we have this process of all the debris falling on the ground and creating this basically a mulch layer. So forests are messy places. They're full of fallen debris, branches, dead and dying trees, litter, mulch, dead animals, excrement of dead animals, or wait a minute, excrement of live animals. Everything falls on the ground and rots. And that produces this organic layer, which really is essential to these trees growing in this situation. So I've had really amazing fortune to go to Europe and travel to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and study the trees growing there in the urban forest that remains in the abandoned workers town of Pripyat. This was in 2016. And I want you to notice the amazing mulch layer that's forming here in this urban street. This happens to be Lenin Boulevard in Pripyat. And I suspect that in Soviet Europe, there was a Lenin Boulevard in every city of any size. And basically in this area, there was no pruning for 30 years, no litter removal for 30 years, no irrigation for 30 years, just trees growing and more trees encroaching from the surrounding forest. And so it turns out from our studies over in Europe, I've been there 4 times. We've measured the growth rates of these trees, and they're growing rather slowly. And we think that's because of the residual radiation in Chernobyl that has stunted them. But the other thing is that the mulch is amazing, and it doesn't break down very fast. And there's some research that shows that radiation actually retards the degradation of mulch. So it's a very interesting system, but I would say that the horse chestnuts there, that's what these are, horse chestnuts, and other trees are doing very well in their radioactively mulched environment. So going back to a forest on this continent, we can see these remains. Here's a tree that has fallen and it started to decay, mostly decayed, and it changes color. It goes from, gray wood to brown wood. And that's because fungi have gone through these fallen timbers and absorbed all the cellulose, and all that remains is the lignin, and fungi are less efficient at destroying lignin. And so what remains ends up as humus, and that is the organic matter input to the forest floor from above. But trees in and of themselves are a tremendous inputter to the organic system. So a mature oak tree like this is going to drop leaves over its lifetime, should produce many inches of thickness of litter, and we call this litter fall. on the ground under its canopy. And trees that are undisturbed by people are natural at doing this. All trees everywhere will drop litter under their canopies and it will build up into some sort of layer. We as people and gardeners and managers of environments often don't allow this to happen. And then those trees become more impacted, more disease prone, more nutrient hungry, and a variety of different things. So hardscape really then is a very poor substitute for litter fall zones around trees. This is not the optimal environment for a shade tree to grow in. And I think we all should intuitively know this. The fact that trees will grow like this is sort of a testament to their resilience and capabilities. But even though they'll grow, doesn't mean that it's optimal or that they're doing as well as they should or could. So we need this litter fall space. We need nutrient cycling from the leaves and other materials that fall. And, trees are a great dust collector. They are a giant architectural solar array, really, with leaves optimized through their phyllotaxy or arrangement to catch the maximum number of photons. But they also catch aerosols from the atmosphere, deposition of dusts and such. And when it rains, those get washed down through the canopy into the litter layer, and it provides an actually measurable source of NPK and other nutrients to the tree. So trees in many ways are self-fertilizing if what is generated is allowed to percolate down to the forest floor or the canopy floor. So one of the benefits of mulching then is that we do have somewhere to put the on-site generated green waste mulch. And it is ultimately the most sustainable landscape. So in landscapes then, mulches can provide us some benefits such as weed control, moisture conservation, modifying the soil, getting fungi in the soil, and I'll tell you why that's good. They'll provide minerals, and trees will grow better when mulched. And this is because mulches promote rooting. Now, some people will say, well, I have too many roots. I don't want roots. And that may be, but the tree always wants roots, and especially healthy ones. And that's what mulching provides. So generally speaking, the thicker the mulch, the more the nutrients that will occur under it. And organic mulches will increase the soil tilth or arability or diggability. Not that you want to be digging under your trees, but they will. And organic matter content. Applying fresh mulch to the soil will never suck the nitrogen out of it from underneath. That is a horticultural misnomer, and it is a wrong-headed thinking. You can apply freshly chipped tree parts on any soil, and you will not take away nitrogen, but in time, nitrogen will be added as that mulch breaks down. So organic mulches suppress soil-borne diseases. They prevent annual weeds from germinating, especially around young trees where there's sunlight. And they help to conserve soil moisture, and they prevent weeds from germinating. So what are the roles of fungi? Most of the time I'm dealing with fungi as pathogens. Here we have armillaria, oak root fungus. Here we have a Ganoderma that's decaying the inside of this tree. But really their role, whether they're pathogens or not, is to get the carbon out of the tree and into the soil, to break it down, to decompose it. And if they didn't do that, forests would just be piles of logs that never break down. And so in the Carboniferous period, before fungi were really that highly evolved, that's kind of what you have. And that's why we have oil today, because all that dense vegetation was eventually squished into oil. So litter layers are decomposed by fungi and other soil inhabiting organisms. There are more bacteria by number, but more fungi by mass. So you can count a lot of bacteria, but if you actually weighed the organism, fungi are what really are impacting mulch layers. These organisms, to be effective, they need a constant influx of carbon to survive. They're not going to survive on just, one mulch application. And if you think about it, that's what litter is doing. It's constantly falling out of the tree. the microbiology that grows under that tree is requiring that input on a more or less all the time basis. So this is also why adding bark mulch is not really that helpful to the soil food web or microbial community, because the carbon in bark is all tied up with wax and fibers, and it's not really available to microbes. So they need as well a consistent supply of moisture. Mulches need to be moist in order to be effective to do the things they do for trees. They also need favorable temperatures. You have all of these things there in the islands. So fungi are filamentous. They can do all kinds of things. They generally grow into their substrate, like the strawberry is being eaten by Rhizopus, or this anthracnose fungus is eating this oak leaf. So the fungus grows into its food and it just melts it enzymatically and eats it up. Well, that's exactly what fungi are doing in mulch as well. Mulch isn't per se living, but there are fungi that are doing the same process. And the other thing that fungi do is they articulate with trees, whether they're ectomycorrhizae growing on the outside of conifer roots or birches, or a lot of the North American temperate species are ectomycorrhizae, or they're endomycorrhizae that grow inside of roots, and many of the tropical trees. And quite a few trees have both. Oaks have both. These mycorrhizae, especially ectomycorrhizae, really are dependent on additional soil organic matter input. So when litter is falling out of trees and landing on soil, these organisms are part of what's recycling it back into the root system of the plant. So they're absorbing the litter, they're breaking it down, taking it to the tree, and feeding it back into the tree. Nature's great recyclers. And so arbuscular mycorrhizae channel plant-produced carbon out into soil. And this is something that has become quite known in recent years. You see the little tiny threads of mycorrhizae here. These are endomycorrhizae, and they're coagulating grains of soil and sticking grains of soil to the root. This is what creates more porous soils, less root rot hazardous soils, more disease-resistant soils. And so Dr. Linderman at USDA Corvallis, his whole career basically was important because he showed that there's this thing called the hyphosphere, which is the mycorrhizal hyphae that are attached to the plant on their roots. And in this area of soil where the hyphae are growing, they cultivate different organisms that help suppress diseases and protect this plant from getting sick. And so if the mycorrhizal population is healthy, so then will be the plant, because the bacteria that grow in these hyphae are producing the antibiotics that keep it healthy. And we know that adding organic matter to soil adds fungal biology. So this is a plating I did on a chip mulch soil in my yard that had been mulched for many years. And this is compared to my horse pen where a plant hasn't grown for 25 years. And you can see that there's basically no life in that soil where there's no plants and no organic matter. So some of these organisms that invade mulch are hyperparasites. They produce antibiotics. In this slide, we see the fungus Phytophthora cinnamomi being suppressed or stopped from growing by the antibiotics produced by chitomium, a biological control agent. And so there are a number of these that grow in wood chips and in mulches, and they help suppress disease. And then a number of others actually grow on the pathogen and actually parasitize it and destroy it. All of these are saprophytes, and they're encouraged by mulches. So that's a good thing. We have, fungi that like to live in mulch that fight the bad guys that want to get our trees. But we also have these partners actually changing the characteristics of the soil, making it more cultivatable for our trees. So in this case, this is what we want to see. We want to see a soil with voids and channels, with fungi growing through it, with roots, microaggregation going on. This is just an ideal soil. It's structured. It has a lot of porosity. This is going to support trees really well. And so these micropores and channels are critical. And you get this because there's carbon in that soil, and not just any kind of old carbon, but labile carbon. And by that, I mean the carbon that has energy to do microbial work, the carbon that isn't broken down yet, the carbon that microbes can feed on. And so the mycorrhizae use plant carbon. They take the sugar right out of the plant and excrete it into soil as something called glomalin, or glomalin-related soil protein. And that's what in turn creates the microaggregation of soils, increasing its porosity. So we have the action of saprophytes, we have the actions of mutualistic organisms like mycorrhizae, all of these things injecting carbon into soil. So let's reflect now on what roots want. All roots, plant roots of any kind, really, but trees in particular, they want gas exchange. That's why most tree roots are up in the few feet of soil, because that's where oxygen is available for respiration. They want to have moisture, they want minerals, and they want microbes. They want to have the microbiology to use those organisms to get the nutrients that they need. And then they want a soil that's structured that meets their needs. What do mulches want? Mulches probably don't care what they get. But for a mulch to be an effective partner in cultivating a tree, it also wants oxygen and gas exchange and water and some degree of minerals, which are already in the mulch feedstock, and especially microbes to begin the process of breaking it down. So one of the things that I showed in my very first mulch study, which was back in 1990, was that root length under mulched trees is significantly higher than unmulched trees. And so mulches promote rooting. And the other thing that we learned is that freshly chipped large eucalyptus chips were the most root producing. That eucalyptus is an absolutely wonderful mulch. And I know that flies in the face of what a lot of people think, but this finding has been reiterated in multiple studies that I've conducted and published. And it turns out that freshly chopped eucalyptus is just the best thing in the world for shade trees, and especially avocados. So the environment that's unfavorable for trees, and I usually go on about this, but I don't have the time today, is the urban environment. And the closer we get into the urban environment, we look at the research by NOAC and some other people, the shorter the lifespan of trees. And this is in Kiev in Ukraine, and somebody put down an homage to mulch here, but that is not adequate. And that really, it's a nice thought, but that's not doing anybody any good. It's certainly not suppressing the weeds, and it's not covering the soil. So a mulch doily cannot really substitute for litter fall on this massive level, but a mulch doily like this is better than no mulch doily, because for one, it keeps the turf grass away, and it also keeps weeds from germinating around the tree. So what is the best thing to use, compost or fresh tree chips? Well, compost is not a good mulch, and you shouldn't be using it as a mulch around shade trees. The fresh tree chips is. And why is that? We go back to the energy slide. There is no energy in compost. This has all been broken down. All the microbial work was done in the compost pile. There's nothing left to feed your soil, basically. So if you want to encourage the microbial activity under your tree to benefit its roots, this is the material you have to use. Fresh tree chips, especially those containing wood and some leaves and a nice thick layer thereof. So compost carbon is about 66% gone by the time you get the product. That's if it's stable. And keep in mind that the definition of a mature compost is one that doesn't heat when it's turned. It's not biologically active anymore. So what that also means, if you put it in a different way, is that it's dead. Basically, compost is dead. The ability to do microbial work is gone. And so that is, if that is the thing you're trying to achieve in the landscape, which I hope you are, that's not the material to use. So composting also is not a natural process. Garbage in, garbage out. Composting distills organic matter. It gets rid of the carbon. It concentrates the salts. And in some cases, it concentrates things you don't want, like herbicides. But we're not going to go long on that. So fresh tree chips, not decomposed at all, are the best thing. They're energy abundant. The nutrient level is fixed, but it will slowly become available. The microbes are just beginning to multiply, whereas in compost, the microbes are already dead or in stasis or as spores. The texture is coarse, and in compost, the texture is fine. And that's a big problem with compost because fine textured mulches support the growth of weeds, and they also allow moisture to evaporate out of the soil. And finally, compost can be salty, and salts are usually not a problem with tree chips. So fresh tree trimmings, also known as green waste, are labile. They're carbon rich, they're coarse grind, they're high carbon, low nitrogen, but they will not draft or extract or absorb nitrogen from underlying soil. That's a horticultural myth. They have the greatest potential to greatly increase the soil microbial activity over time, and the carbon is available for microbes to do their work. So one thing we've shown in some of our research here is that this is the depth of mulch. So no mulch, 1 inch, 3 inch, 6 inches. The more you put on, the more NP and K you get in the soil under the mulch over time. So the nutrient release is roughly proportional to the thickness of the mulch you apply. If you want to supply nutrients, and this is so true in a tropical environment, all of your nutrients are in the organic phase. They're being recycled. The forest requires litter fall in order to get its nutrients. So anywhere in the islands where you're in a high rainfall environment, this is critical. If you don't have mulch, you're going to be sustaining plants with fertilizers. And we know from our studies that we need to put down at least 3 to 4 inches to get 100% weed control. Any less than that, and annual weeds will germinate through. Again, I want to make the comment, mulch does not immobilize soil N. Mulch that sits on the top of the soil will not take the nitrogen out. And I've been mulching my apple orchard here in Arizona with planer shavings and sawdust from the woodworking shop down the road. And I have 0 nutrient draw under those mulches. So in California, we're doing a lot of landscape conversions. We're going from the old turf landscape to the new drought tolerant, hardscape and less water using plants. But where's the room for mulch? In this landscape, they just would never think to use mulch because it's brown and the landscape has to be green. And in this landscape, they're not using mulch because there's nowhere to put it. So this is the previous landscape that was renovated, and that tree was renovated to a decomposed granite. This is an alder or riparian tree. Within 2 years, it was dead and taken out. And that tree ended up as green waste somewhere, basically. So that green waste can then be used if this system was ideal. It could be brought back to this landscape, and instead of applying decomposed granite, we use wood chips. And that would actually save water instead of expending water. Now, a lot of people have wondered and asked, and we've researched the survival of pathogens in fresh mulch. And here you see some piles being constructed of freshly chipped trees. And these bags all contain the same stuff plus pathogens. And they're in lines because we pull them out every so often on a time interval and see what survived over time. And so, we found that a couple of things. One thing we were really studying was oak root fungus, which is armillaria. And we found that it survives about 1.5 days. And over time, that the samples we pull out are increasingly infected with trichoderma, which is a biological control organism. So that inoculum just sitting in a stockpile, not being turned, not composted per se, eventually gets annihilated with microbial competition. So another thing we're seeing right now on the rise in California particularly is Botrosphyria, because we have so much drought, and probably Arizona too. But Botrosphyria occurs worldwide. I'm sure it's in Hawaii as well. It is going to be in the areas where things are not irrigated enough. And these are canker diseases. And so certainly this could be a concern. If we threw that in the chipper, that's an awful lot of inoculum. If you went and put that down on a landscape, that could pose an issue, I think. And so Botrosphyria tends to grow deeply into tissue. And of course, you have Ohia wilt. And I think this is something that's, I like to call it chop and drop. Go ahead and chip it, but the chips should stay right there. They shouldn't really leave. They shouldn't be moved from where that Ohia wilt tree is. But if you do chip that wood, the survival of the pathogen is going to be greatly reduced. Because what happens when you chip something is you expose it to the microbial activity of all the other fungal partners that are trying to rot that wood. And pathogens are opportunists. They don't survive well outside of their hosts. So one of the best things you can probably do, although this isn't proven by any of my research, but it's supposition, but probably good supposition, is to cut these infected trees down and chip them right where they were. So developing a mulch specification. As I said, this amount of mulch is an homage to mulch. It's not enough to do anything. We need thick mulch layers. Mulches should have a woody component, and fresh mulch is the best and is what we recommend. Avoid compost. They make poor mulches. They do nothing for the soil microbial activity, or I shouldn't say nothing. They do little for the soil microbial activity as compared to fresh tree mulches. Apply the largest area that's possible to simulate litter fall. And I realize I work with landscape people all the time. I know this isn't feasible. In many cases, it's completely impractical to mulch anything. And so I think what we're trying to work toward is saving trees that can be saved, where mulch is not an objection to being utilized. And so what we've done is we've been able to take trees that were not doing well and mulch them and really turn them around through the mulching process as compared to not having mulch. So in conclusion,
James,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. You have 5 minutes left.
Well, you
few
see where I'm at.
Sounds good.
You are seeing the conclude slide, right? The miracle of Zoom, I can't tell actually what you're seeing.
Yes, can see it.
So remember to avoid cement mulch as we have here. This is a permanent coverage of the soil that doesn't add a lot. It's a mineral mulch. I know you guys have lots of lava mulch. I've seen the lava mulch, either applied naturally or intentionally. But this is not the mulch you're looking for. Really, you want mulch that applies labile carbon to soil to get all the benefits from the microbes. I have a couple of resources for you. My colleague and I published a paper a couple of years ago for ANR called Mulches for Landscapes. It's ANR publication 8672. It's free. All you have to do is go to that reference and you can get that. Another good reference is the review article by Linda Chalker-Scott, who's the current editor of the Western Chapter newsletter for the International Society of Arboriculture. And she wrote a great article on the impact of mulches on landscape plants and the environment. It's a little bit old now, but it summarizes all the research up to that point, to 2007, and does a good job. This is not your course code, so ignore that. You do have my QR code here if you want to go to my webpage in California and look me up. Also, I think that's the last slide. And I'm going to stop sharing. I think you had my email, but I'm going to put it in the chat. There you go. anybody can email me at any time and I'll get back to you and answer your questions about mulch or ohia wilt or whatever you want to know. And I'm more than happy to work with you sort of remotely on your landscape problems. A lot of people send me pictures. I try to provide some thought about that. And often we can't do everything from pictures, but sometimes we can make some inroads. So find ways to use mulch, use fresh mulch. Don't get too concerned with compost. And there you have it. I've got some time for questions if you have time.
Thank you, James. Wonderful presentation. Great timing. I do see a few questions. Michelle Montgomery asked, can you please talk about decontamination of machinery used to chip disease material, such as ohia with rapid ohia death?
Yeah, I think that's a concern. I'm not sure what the answer is, but my answer would be to have dedicated chippers, and chippers that just chip ohia wood, that are diseased ohia wood, that is, and that don't get used on other wood. And so there's that. Beyond that, how would you sanitize a chipper? I have no idea. Throw a gallon of alcohol in there and touch it off. That sounds like fun research, but I haven't gotten to that yet. I know we've had similar problems here with Fusarium wilt and Canary Island date palms, because it's an incurable disease. It's spread by chainsaws. People don't like to sanitize their chainsaw. So very often the best thing to do is to dedicate a saw to a tree. And that's what a lot of people have done. They have a saw that is only used on their tree. When the people come to maintain that tree, that's the saw they use. And so that's high-end stuff, of course. So it may be impractical for your current ohia problem, which seems to be getting out of hand.
James, thank you for that. I am curious, based on your research with eucalyptus, what species did you test? I'm very fascinated.
We tested a whole bunch, but Eucalyptus globulus was the most used. And I did some seedling assays trying to get inhibition with different kinds. We tested about 10 different species. In the field, nothing really worked any better than anything else for inhibiting seedlings. We were able to inhibit some seedling growth with Eucalyptus sideroxylon rosea, and that produces a lot of resin, as I'm sure you know. But again, when we took that out to actual soil, there was no difference from Eucalyptus globulus, which was the least inhibitory. So most of my studies have been with globulus. The one on sycamore that I did was with Caladicalyx. Anyway, it all seems to be good for mulch.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. This is Michelle Montgomery. And since I'm the next speaker, I have no problem with having a little bit more discussion on this if you guys want, because I see a couple other questions that I'm really interested in personally. One from David, which was one that I had also, is how long is mulch considered fresh for? Because you talk about fresh mulch being best for activating microbial content and stuff. And here in Hawaii, probably other places, you know, the green waste, green waste companies, they do windrows in order to turn and heat it up a little bit in order to at least process it somewhat for pathogenic microbes, hopefully, and also for other kinds of pests. Like here in Hawaii, we have little fire ants, which I'm going to be talking about, and that's one of the processing methods that they do for that. So what are your thoughts on that stuff?
Are those little fire ants in the canopy of the tree?
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah, again, I'm not an entomologist and haven't studied that problem, so I will back away from that in terms of making a recommendation for you. I guess if we set aside pests and fire ants, trees would prefer that the chip load from the tree trimming job goes right from the chipper onto the ground. And that's the kind of fresh we're talking about. And then so the question gets to be, well, how often should I replace that? And that answer gets to be, how warm is it where you are and how often does it rain? Because the rainier, warmer places are going to break down the mulch faster. And so you would have to monitor the decomposition rate of your mulch, and it could be quite fast if there's not a lot of wood in there. Wood, of course, takes longer to break down. So over here, where we're talking 20 inches of rain a year, we're doing annual remulching, mulching once a year. In your wetter areas of Hawaiian Islands, I would think you would mulch more frequently than that if you had that luxury.
Yeah.
And this would all be judged by how fast it's going away. So if you put down 6 inches and you're down to an inch in 4 months, well, you've lost most of whatever was happening there. It's time to remulch. So it would all be gauged by that thickness and how fast it goes away. And there's a couple of things about that too that are important. When you first put down mulch, it has a certain loftiness or fluffiness that settles. So the applied 6 inches really is going to be 4 inches in about a month when it just sort of gets watered in and settles down and is doing its thing. So your real depth is that settled depth that occurs sometime later. And then you're going to watch that. And when that kind of stable 4 inches goes down to 2 inches, it's time to renew. So when it's 50% gone, then you need to add more. Of course, if it was the tree itself doing this, it would just be adding its stuff all the time. But I know in managed landscapes, we don't let the leaves fall and we don't let the stuff accumulate. So the nice thing about mulching is it kind of looks, depending on the source, it looks sort of uniform, and you can do it and it still looks okay in some cases. So Michelle, were there other questions?
In the chat, yeah, there's one from Matt, and I don't know who's moderating this, but I'll read it if you don't mind. Somebody said, Matt said that they had the compost tested by Elaine Ingram from Soil Food Web, and the compost had active or viable microbes. And so they were wondering why you say it's quote unquote dead.
Okay, well, there's a lot of answers to that, and I'm going to try and answer it without criticizing Elaine's work. She did some valuable work that sort of introduced the importance of soil food webs. But carbon is labeled based on the amount, and that's labile, labile, based on the amount of glucose that's left in it, basically. So everything uses glucose for energy. Wood is composed of cellulose. Cellulose is just glucose molecules hooked together with a certain carbon 1,4 bond. Fungi have the ability to break that bond and get the energy. And when they do that, they release enzymes. And many of those enzymes are beneficial in controlling disease, but that's a whole other story. So the reason why I say it's dead is because most of the glucose has been absorbed, broken down, utilized by microbes, which then were eaten by other microbes. And this cycle was repeated over and over again in a hot compost pile where thermophilic microorganisms did all that very quickly. And they basically kicked out about 66% of the carbon from that compost pile and left you with basically the waste product, the end product of that process. So why run all that microbial activity in a pile when you could be running it out in the landscape at a slower rate with different organisms, less bacteria, more fungi, that are going to benefit your soil in place instead of wasting all that energy in the compost pile? That's my logic. And as far as why Elaine says something, I can't speak to that, but she's probably not looking at the same organisms I am.
Well, if I can speak, we use compost every time we do a new landscape, but we also top dress it with mulch. So we're actually doing both. We're finding, like you said, the soil's dead. It's just clay, sometimes if you're lucky, clay and sand, but no organics left. So we use a
Who's
compost.
speaking, by the way? I
Yeah.
can't tell from my screen who's talking.
Matt Liam is speaking.
Oh,
He's the
okay, good.
who
Matt,
asked the question.
continue, please. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, I think I used to do composting, and we sold it compost like to Nalo Farms, and they found after they tilled in compost, mulch would have been great too, but they just tilled in compost and they got rid of a disease fungus they had because it stimulated what I thought was a soil food web, and then the fungal feeding nematodes increased and wiped out a disease that they had. Well, after they started incorporating compost into the replanting.
Well, let's take it back.
And compost is only screened to 3/8 minus, so there's carbon still in it. Maybe that's what's going on. I mean, it's not.
Well, it all
pure
depends.
humus,
It depends
right?
on the compost, right? Who made it, how stable it is, what's left in it. And there's infinite variation in compost. So it could still have some microbial activity or the ability to create microbial activity or not. But technically a stable compost, mature, will not reheat when you repile it. It's basically incapable of sustaining a thermophilic reaction from the microbes. And that's because the carbon has all been used up. So what really generates that nematode pulse in the soil isn't the compost, it's the fresh organic matter. So what really stimulates fungi is labile carbon. It's not the finished compost. What can happen is that there are metabolites of microbial processes left over in compost that are disease depressive, antibiotics and other things. So there's also a wealth of minerals and nutrients in compost. So you get a fertilization effect when you use compost. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against using compost for those reasons. And I believe compost grows great plants. In vegetable gardening and areas where you're digging and tilling, that's great. But in no-till situations like shade tree cultivation, we don't want to really till the roots. We're talking about putting things on the soil surface, not in the soil. And so under those circumstances, mulches are much better. And think of it again from the energy perspective. Where is the most energy for microbes to do their work? It's in the fresh feedstock. And so if we're trying to get that benefit, that's what you put down.
Great, thank you, James. Russell, do we have
You're
time
welcome.
for one more question?
Sure, one quick question and answer, and then we'll move on because we do need time so that we have an hour for the CEU requirements. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, James. So Zoli Wall asked, will fresh mulch absorb nitrogen from fertilizer if applied at the same time? And also, can allelopathic chemicals in fresh chipping materials affect plants that might be growing under shade trees?
Good questions, both. Sure, it kind of depends on what state your microbial community is at when you apply that fertilizer. Fungi require nitrogen just like plants. And so if you have a very active fungal web in your mulch, then that will suck up some of your nitrogen. It's not going to pull it out of the underlying soil, but if you apply it over the top of the mulch, maybe a little less gets to the tree or whatever roots you're trying to get to. I don't have research evidence on that though, but that makes sense to me because fungi feed on nitrogen just like plants do. So that's a possibility. Keep in mind on allelopathy that the definition of it is the inhibition or interference of one living plant by another. Once you have chopped up an allelopathic plant, it's not alive anymore. And so by definition, any sort of inhibition that you would get from an applied mulch product would not be allelopathy, but phytotoxicity or just application of phytotoxins. Now, what would those most likely be? Most allelochemicals are water soluble and they leach out really quick. And so they're not going to be around for long. The times I've seen it is in badly composted stockpiles where you have really big piles, say 20 foot tall, and the center of that pile goes anaerobic, and you go into fermentative respiration, and you're producing short chain acids like butyric acid and others, propionic acid and alcohols, and you apply that material, and yes, that will cause harm to plants. And so we see that in badly prepared immature composts or yard waste output. And so I don't call it allelopathy, it would be phytotoxicity. So that's kind of the short answer to those questions, but Zoli, maybe we can take it up longer in email because I know you got to kind of move on to your next speaker and do that thing. So aloha, everybody, mahalo, and I hope I get to come over and see you all at some time in the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. James.
Thank you, Dr. Downer. We could actually use you over on Big Island to look at some MacNut compost and mulching. Over here.
Be my pleasure. I love the Big Island. It's a great place.
Maui needs you too.
I haven't been to Maui for a long time.
Come on over.
Maybe. Okay, maybe.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to introduce our next presenter, who actually introduced herself a little bit earlier, Michelle Montgomery from Hawaii Ant Lab. So Michelle is the research specialist at Hawaii Ant Lab, and she's going to speak today on some of her research looking at specifically organic options and the direction we're going with organic options for little fire ant control. So I'll keep it short. Please take it away, Michelle. Oh, you're muted.
I tend to do that sometimes. Thank you. You know, I'm sure we all do. I hope you like my space deck here. It's one of my favorites, a huge sci-fi fan here. And yeah, so my name is Michelle Montgomery. I'm with the Hawaii Ant Lab, and I am the research specialist here. I have been doing the ant thing for, about 10 years now. Before that, I worked a couple years with USDA. And before that, I worked with USGS on conservation projects at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. So I've kind of been around the block, so to speak, as far as crop protection, agriculture, conservation, insect stuff for the past 18 years or so. I know a little bit of things from those times, and but right now I'm going to talk to you guys about organic, the whole organic, I don't want to say controversy, but the whole organic thing that you are likely to encounter especially regarding ant control and little fire ants as they continue to spread across our islands, unfortunately. So I will share my screen.
And while Michelle's sharing, just so everybody remembers, I am going to pick 4 questions from this presentation to quiz you on if you are going to be applying for pesticide CEUs. So pay attention to the quiz questions.
So just so you guys are prepared, This part is probably going to be about 30, maybe 40 minutes of me presenting stuff. And then I was hoping that we can all just kind of have the rest of the time to talk story, Q&A, kind of interactive, so we can talk about things that you're specifically interested in, especially given the mulching presentation you just heard, because that's very important stuff. And it's it can be pretty impactful for your guys' industry. So hopefully you're into it. We'll see. And slideshow, but can you guys all see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
And as I scroll up to the beginning, we're going to talk about organics, the futures and the possibility of the organic ant control in Hawaii, because every day I hear about this. And so I'm going to try to take you in some kind of a logical path from beginning to end. I'm not sure how many of you are on Big Island, or how many of you are really Akamai and understanding, knowing about this problem in Hawaii in general.
We've got people across the state right now from most islands, and we got a lot of folks from Oahu, but also Big Island, Maui.
Yeah. So this is not a quote Big Island problem. 100%. We have numerous infestations on Oahu and Maui that we are working with Oahu and Maui invasive species committees, as well as the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, to eradicate. There are 2 infestations on Kauai, and we're working with Kauai Invasive Species Committee and Hawaii Department of Agriculture on eradicating and making sure that follow-up surveys throughout the island are conducted in order to, for biosecurity measures, to make sure that it doesn't continue to spread. But this is not just a Big Island problem. And so it's very important that you guys as landscapers in the landscaping community are aware of this, so that you can help be on those front lines to mitigate the spread of this pest. It's it's awful. So these guys, these are teeny, tiny ants. They're the size of a pinhead. Obviously you see this pencil here, so you get some kind of perspective as to the size, but they also have this super nasty sting that is so painful. And for me personally, it's like almost 15 or 20 minutes of like a hot needle going into me, and then I have 2 weeks of itchy welts. It has a lot of other impacts, but really this is one of the biggest pests that we have in Hawaii, and it's not just agricultural pests, it's pests in general. As I just mentioned, they sting, and I hate their stings. This is very common reaction, and the most common places for people to get stung are on the neckline, on the waistband, within the bras, if you wear bras, you know, on your cuffs, anywhere that your clothing potentially restricts. The ants will fall from the trees and crawl on you, and then they get stuck in your clothes. They get stuck in those places that are restricting. And when they're restricted in their movement, that's when they sting. They're not like coming after you to sting the crap out of you just because they're jerks. It's because they get trapped in a compromised situation and they can't get out, so they just freak out and start stinging you. And so that's why it's very common to get stung in the collar line, the waistbands, and places like that. They also blind pets now and domestic animals. This is something that gets people over that threshold because, you know, as humans, we can say, oh, I can take care of that. It's not that big of a deal to me. But when they start seeing their fur babies, like their cats and their dogs, or even their livestock go blind because when they're very young, this kind of gets them over the hump to try to treat. This is what instills their or touches on their values and their emotions. If you're a farmer, or maybe in your guys' case as landscapers, the care of your plants is really important. And these ants are within groups of ants that farm scale insects, mealybugs, aphids, general sap-sucking and phytophagous insects that also transmit plant disease. So what this does is it can reduce the productivity of your plants. I mean, obviously it transmits plant disease. On the Big Island, we have banana bunchy top. I'm not sure how widespread it is on the other islands, but it is also very correlated with little fire ant infestations in infested areas. You get higher rates of banana bunchy top in areas that you have little fire ants because they're farming the banana aphids that vector that disease. And so there's a strong correlation with plant disease from phytophagous insects and the farming of those with little fire ants. They also displace other organisms in general. They displace other insects, especially, you know, not just other ant species, but you see on the right-hand side that little guy is carrying a phorid fly. Those have been known to be parasitic, parasitic with some insects. They also displace other animals, and in other countries, they have been observed actually preying on and affecting ground nesting turtles and amphibians. And if they can do that in other places, they can impact our hawksbill and green sea turtles here in Hawaii. They can potentially impact our ground nesting or generally nesting birds, in not just on the grounds, because these guys are in the trees too, right? And so they affect all forms of life and in pretty much all aspects of life. These are not your typical ants. Little fire ants have multiple queens. So if you think about your average ant, people think of, you know, a single queen, a single nest. They have their own little house, their own little bubble of the world, and that's what they're restricted to. They war with the neighbors. They don't want any more queens. They're perfectly happy in their own world. These guys break that mold because they like to have many queens. It's not uncommon to find half a dozen queens in a single nest that fits within a MacNut shell. It's a lot of queens. And if you kind of extrapolate that to the bigger landscape, well, if you can have 6 queens in a MacNut shell, how many queens do you have in a truckload of MacNut mulch? It just blows your mind, right? It's an astounding amount, or it's an astounding number of ants that you come up with. They don't build mounds. This isn't like the red ants with the tropical fire ants or other types of quote unquote fire ants. These guys will hide behind leaf litter or under leaf litter. They'll be behind moss, under rocks. They literally nest everywhere. They're in the trees, they're on the ground, they're in the pile of garbage that's on the side of the house. They're in that mulch pile, let's say mulch pile, more like green waste or compost pile that you have sitting around. They're literally everywhere. They build these super colonies. So other, opposed to other kinds of ants, they, other ants will, like I said, they will war with the neighboring colony. It doesn't matter if it's the same species. It's, you're our neighbors, we're not good neighbors, we're competing for resources. These guys are different and they share all their resources. So this is like the ultimate of communal living. All of the nests within connected area within their foraging distance will all work together to share their resources. Now, these are what's called super colonies, and they can span miles. It's not just, oh, you have one here and then you have one far away, and those two will eventually war. No, as those two kind of infested areas grow and merge, they all start to work together. They are transported mainly by people. And I was just talking with some colleagues at the Department of Ag today about coconuts. Somebody had come in with some coconuts that they wanted to ship out. And this is a very common item to be infested because the ants like to nest in coconut trees. And in the husk of a coconut, if you get a slash in there or a pupa in there, the ants will move in and they will form a nest. And it's almost impossible to disinfest that coconut without dehusking the whole thing. I've seen a truckload of coconuts, sprouted coconuts, come to the Hawaii Department of Agriculture wanting to be inspected for transport to another island. There is no way that they're going to be able to disinfest sprouted coconuts. It's not going to happen. And so that's a very common way on the Big Island that people do spread it, and it's going to be very common on the other islands as this problem begins to worsen. Another issue is the spreading of these ants through beehives and commercial beehives, moving the hives from one orchard to another for pollination purposes. Sounds like a great idea, but the ants do like to nest within the hives because they like to take advantage of some of that honey and the protected space. So it's pretty common for them to be, it's the most common way for them to be moved around is people moving them around inadvertently. They're also very difficult to see because these guys are, 2 millimeters, rusty brown color. I challenge anybody to look at a tree and point out the fire ant that's crawling on the bark. I don't know if you guys, how many of you guys have been looking at that coconut on the screen right here? How many fire ants can you see on that coconut? Probably not many. And I bet the things that you think are fire ants on that coconut are not actually the fire ants. It's something else, maybe a little scrape in the coconut or something. I had to blow up that picture pretty big to even see if there were any fire ants on there, honestly. And that's the kind of thing that I deal with every day. And so I'm used to looking at this stuff. For you guys on the other islands that don't encounter the little fire ants on a regular basis, this is a skill and this is something that you're gonna be developing over time. And so the more critical you can be looking at potted plants, looking at the materials that you're moving around from one place to another. the more aware you are of this problem, then the better chances there are of you seeing something. And if you see something, say something, right? That's the only way that we're going to be able to attack and address that problem on the other islands. For you, like I was saying, you guys may be the first to encounter this. You guys you're in the field, you are doing these things, you are working with the plants, you are trimming the trees, you're there working in the dirt with everything. So when you have residents or you have property managers that aren't around, they don't know what's going on, but maybe you notice that your crew at a particular site is like, we're getting these stings. When we work at this house, we start to burn and it gets really itchy and it's really painful and we just don't want to go there. That's probably a red flag that there may be little fire ants there. You start to feel a burning sensation, but where you look for that burning sensation, you don't see anything. That's a red flag. They love to be in the trees. And so I don't know how many of you are actually doing the kind of arborist work and tree trimming, but that is one of the first places that landscapers encounter these ants, or if they're working in very heavily landscaped areas with a lot of tall vegetation that they're working under. The wind blows, the ants fall out of the canopies and get onto you. The other way that landscapers are really a part of this issue is because they're also, unfortunately, pathways to be able to spread these ants. And this isn't, obviously it's not intentional, but it's something that you guys should be aware of. So moving infested material from one place to an uninfested area is of great concern because that's how these spread a lot. So you like the slash that you guys get from a particular property, unfortunately mulching on site, or if you don't mulch on site, if you take somewhere to be mulched and then that mulch is loaded up and carted to another area. On some islands, green waste facilities and dumping at green waste facilities is poorly planned. And so it's very inconvenient to take to a technical green waste facility. And a lot of landscape companies may, or maybe not even companies, but general work crews might decide to guerrilla dump. They know of an abandoned road, or they know of a rural road they can go down, nobody will see, and they just kind of dump a truckload of material. That is a very good pathway to spread little fire ants. And this has been an issue especially on Maui. I'm not sure if that's one of the issues on Oahu. So please keep that in mind and take them to formal green waste sites where they can do processing of that material. I know on the Big Island, we do work with the Green Waste Management Company, the Hawaii Earth Products, and they do windrows and they do manage the ants, and we do monitor the green waste facilities to make sure that their methods and practices are effective and that the risk is very low of people transporting ants from collecting green waste. So please keep that in mind. If you're working with residents or even resorts that have residences, since you're the first to encounter little fire ants, you go to the residents and say, hey, you guys get ants. And they kind of start to panic. like, I don't know, what do we do? Can you guys get rid of them? And you guys are landscapers, you're not pest control operators. So it's not necessarily your job, but some landscapers do offer those kind of services. And so I want to make sure that you guys know how you can do this if you choose. We do have more comprehensive trainings and stuff available if you're really interested in providing these kind of services. This particular one is more going to be focused on organic stuff and kind of the future of organic. So you can talk to homeowners and give them a realistic idea about what's going on or what is involved in the situation. The number one thing is prevention. Obviously, it's the most organic thing you can do, because if you don't have to treat at all, then that's going to be the best, least chemical way to do anything, right? But if you don't know you have a problem, you can't treat it. So you can't prevent a problem that you're not aware of. And on the other outer islands, or on the islands other than Big Island, it's not a widespread thing, and so people aren't aware of it. This is going to be more and more common as time goes on for you guys. Normally, by the time a resident or somebody knows that they have little fire ants, they've already had it for a number of years, and it's only grown over time to where now they can actually detect it. Once you have it, the only thing you can do is treat it with chemical insecticides. That's the only thing that's going to get rid of it. Wishing isn't going to get rid of it. No amount of, diatomaceous earth is going to get rid of it. You have to actually target sources and use chemicals to kill them. Unfortunately, that's the reality. There's 3 different ways that you can go about managing them. You can use insecticidal baits. These are the most effective at targeting the actual source of the problem, because the ants will come out, they'll feed on the baits, and they'll bring back the active ingredient, share it with everybody, and they'll die. You can use chemical barriers. These are great for excluding ants from an area or keeping them in an area. So for example, you can keep out ants or termites or whatnot from a house when you put a chemical barrier around it, or a garden. As far as keeping them in, if you bring things onto a property and you have a quarantine area, you can keep any potential ants that are in those materials, you can keep it within this quarantine area so it doesn't spread throughout the rest of the property. The last thing are these contact insecticides. These are things like, 7, orange oil, other things, BT, just in general, things that malathion, if it contacts an insect, it kills the insect. These are very limited because they're usually not very long lasting, and they have to actually contact the insect in order for it to die. So with ants, only maybe 10% are actually foraging outside of the nest. At best, you're killing 10% of the colony, which isn't very good return for the money, right? Now, when you talk to your clients, they may say, "Oh, but I don't like chemicals. Are there any organic options available?" We hear this every single day, and the reality is that organic are chemicals. These are part of chemical treatment. There are very big misconceptions and rumors around what organic is or isn't. Organic is naturally occurring minerals, chemicals, and biopesticides. What I mean by biopesticides are things like BT or what's the other one? I have it on the tip of my tongue. Bovaria. So BT and Bovaria. These are, it's a fungus and a bacteria, two different types of products. These are active organisms, but they're in a spray so that you can apply it and you treat beetles, you treat caterpillars, you treat all kinds of things like that. This is kind of what I call a biocontrol crossover because it's still considered chemical, a chemical source or a chemical application, but they're still active organisms, or at least derived from active organisms. Organic products and chemicals are usually rapidly degrading. Sometimes they aren't, and they're still pesticides. They can still be highly toxic. You know, they are also manufactured by chemical companies. I know a lot of people are anti, I won't say I mean, they may be anti-chemical or they are chemophobes or something because of the whole Monsanto or DuPont trigger words. They're against the corporate chemical companies kind of stuff, industry. But who do you think manufactures these organic products? It's those exact same companies. They just license them out to smaller companies to be able to develop products and market other products to you. Organic does not mean that they are non-toxic or safe. There is some extremely toxic and harmful organic products out there. Ricin is a perfect example of this. It was used in during World War II, looking at biological warfare and other biochemical warfares kind of stuff, but it's also a very effective organic pesticide. So this whole organic equals safe is not the same thing. It's also not anti-corporate, like I mentioned before. Who do you think is making these products? And one of the biggest and most important thing that I try to talk to people about is these are not, organic does not mean that they're target specific. My background in general is with pest control, and in an integrated sense. I do like to be target specific when it comes to pest control because I don't want to harm beneficial insects and things that are going to work for me and help me do my job better. I want to use them to boost my reputation, right? So I don't want to kill them off. And if we start using general insecticides, which most organic pesticides are, that does kill a lot more than just your target. So we need to be very conscious about that. Regardless of what the whole perception or what the misinformation is about what is and isn't organic, there's still a huge demand for it. And I mean, you can go and you can talk to people about this and it'll go in one ear and out the other. They'll still say, so what about that organic stuff you were going to tell me about? So you want to be prepared to be able to answer that in whatever capacity you can. For us at the Hawaii Ant Lab, we do all kinds of things. Mostly they're all about little fire ants. We do extension and outreach. We do operations. Obviously, my section is the research section, and I do a lot of research on chemical control, as well as behavior stuff that will help enhance the control methods that we promote. We test existing pesticide products, including organic stuff. We test the new active ingredients. It helps, or it has to be on the market and already developed. We also work with chemical control companies, with the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, EPA, state legislatures, and other agencies and organizations in order to get more products registered for use in Hawaii, because it's not like you have an infinite supply of stuff. I can do research and say, hey, this stuff works. This method works, but you as an end user can't actually use it without it being registered for use in Hawaii. So we work on doing that stuff and getting all of that bureaucratic BS out of the way. What we cannot do is we cannot do biocontrol. And so we get a lot of people asking us about, you know, fungi and all of these things, because these are people that are interested in organic methods and in their anti-chemical, their chemophobes. They want to go the natural route. We cannot do biocontrol. We don't have the facilities available to be able to do that. We cannot formulate new things and new pesticides. We can only use what's on the market and then test that in different ways to be able to have a product that you guys can use, or hopefully eventually get you a product that you can use with as little time in between as possible and with as little effort as possible. We cannot use or suggest things that are illegal to use, that are not registered for use in Hawaii, or the use pattern is not allowable by the label. So we have to be very conscious and strict about that. I could tell you all kinds of things that would work in various ways. It doesn't mean that they're legal, and so we don't go about doing that. We also can't know everything or do everything. And that's why we work with a lot of different collaborators in order to try to touch the bases for getting you guys something to use sooner than later, and then also supporting research for the long-term vision of just pest control in general, and specifically for us, ant control. When it comes to organic ant control, there's a lot of things that people talk about. Some of them work, and some of them don't work the way people think they do. We've tested a number of things, but there's still more that needs to be tested. So we have kind of infinite amount of work as long as we got funding. One of the main things that you might hear or people might suggest to you when you talk about organic is boric acid. I mean, this is one of the oldest pesticides that we know of. They've been using boric acid for generations to control different things. It may or may not be naturally sourced. That's a big misconception. It is also not allowed by certification companies, organic certification companies. The only time it is allowed is if you have a boron deficiency in your soil. So it's never allowed as a pesticide. If you were to use it, it's kind of hit or miss, because boric acid has to be fed upon consistently for a number of weeks to build up to lethal levels before the ants begin to die off. If there's too much boric acid in the bait, they may still eat it, but they'll die too soon before they can actually share it. So the actual efficacy of real ant control is real hit or miss with the boric acid. Spinocid is a very common active ingredient. It's considered a biopesticide because it's derived from bacteria. So it's something that's kind of extracted from bacteria, and it's a great active ingredient. We've tested it on a number of things. It's great as a contact insecticide against a number of insects. It's also a very good active ingredient in ant baits. The ants that you're trying to control generally fall under 3 feeding groups. So it can be sugar ants, oil loving ants, or protein loving ants. So whatever you're looking at, make sure that the actual food attractant for that in that bait is consistent with the ants that you want to control. For little fire ants, we're looking at an oil loving ant. So it needs to be something that says is effective against lipid loving ants and fire ants or something like that. It's a very good active ingredient. Sometimes it's not OMRI certified because of inert ingredients that may be in the product. So the active ingredient is organic. Some of the inert ingredients may not be. And whether or not certifying agencies will accept it is up to them. It's kind of hit or miss with that. We've done a lot of actual testing with the Spinocid, so we do know it is effective against little fire ants. Diatomaceous earth is very common when it's a common thing that people refer to when talking about fire ants and natural control methods. Unfortunately, there's been a bit of research done on it, and it has shown that ants in general are not very susceptible to diatomaceous earth. So these positive results people give in their reviews of products, it might be wishful thinking. It also might be just kind of hit or miss results. Like they just got all the perfect, all of their stars aligned and everything was perfect to actually give them some kind of results. I wouldn't put too much weight in that. Garlic oil is something that has been talked about in the agriculture community as a deterrent and anti-feedant. This is another one that I don't know if you've ever used this, but I've used it in my home garden. And when it comes to organic products being non-harmful, this garlic oil is choking. If I spray even at the applicated or the labeled rate, it is hard to breathe in an area that I spray it. It's not like long-term kind of effects, but there are some pretty serious things to consider. I haven't seen any kind of activity or effectiveness against little fire ants in relation to this. Even as a deterrent or a barrier, we have done laboratory studies where we've drawn a line on a box with this garlic oil. We had food in one side of the bin, we had the ants in the other, and they cross over that barrier within an hour. It was not effective at all. D-limonene is a very, very good active ingredient that is also organic. This is the active ingredient that's in orange oil. It comes from citrus in general. It's excellent. It'll kill a variety of things. It is a contact insecticide, and so it only kills what you see. It is not appropriate for baits. There are very few active ingredients that will actually work for a bait because it has to be very low concentration so that they'll still eat it, but it still has to be effective at that low concentration and even further diluted. So there's some criteria that have to be met, and D-limonene does not meet that. Soapy water, as far as is something that I've heard quite a bit about. What the concept is it breaks the surface tension of the water, which allows an insect to fall, become smothered, and drown. There's been a lot of talk recently about using this as a drench for potted plants, but there is zero evidence that it's actually effective. There's a lot of anecdotal, people saying, oh yeah, this works. I've been using it for so many years and I never had a problem. One, I don't know if they're actually even really checking to see if they have a problem or not. Arnold Hara with CTAR, the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, with UH Manoa. He's done some soapy water baths for post-harvest drenching of cut flowers and stuff like that, which it works because the point is to knock the ants off and have them fall into a bath without having any kind of pesticide residue on your commodity. I think people have taken that and assumed that'll also work as a drench. Now, if you take a very small potted plant and you put it in a soapy water bucket and let it just soak there for 24 hours, it might work. I don't know. There are a lot of things that have to come into play in order for that to be effective. Bulk density of your soil has to come into play. What's the actual composition of your soil? Is it of your potting media? What is it that you planted? Was it a chunk of tea stalk or something that's similar? That's a big chunk that then sprouts, or was it seed with a very loose root ball? All of these things come into play, and we have tested even non-organic residual chemicals with mixed results. And it all comes down to bulk density, what it was that you guys planted and were using as the actual propagative material, how tight the root ball is, all of these kind of things. So I would not put a whole lot of weight into that. It might be effective in limited circumstances. Again, be very cautious. So like I said, Spinocid is a very good active ingredient, and we have done quite a bit of research in our lab. Even though the active ingredient is OMRI certified, the actual products, end products, such as baits and such you get, may not be because of the inert ingredients. Currently, there are we've done a number of field and laboratory studies that we've compared proprietary baits you can get here in Hawaii with Spinocid against conventional counterparts, and they worked great. They worked pretty much the same. And there are two that you can actually get in Hawaii right now. One is called Antix and one is called Firefighter. We're currently working with the chemical company to be able to allow the use, or we're trying to work with chemical companies to be able to allow the use of Spinocid products, like the liquid products, in the Hawaii Ant Labs gel bait. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of the Tango or Provant, but we've come up with a gel matrix you can mix up yourself. It's a homemade bait, and you can use it with an active ingredient of your choice. We're hoping to be able to use Spinocid in the near future as the organic option for that mix. It's kind of a long-term goal, but we're working really hard at it. The two baits that are available right now, you can go to the store and get it. Usually, I think Simplot and Nutrient are the two distributors here in Hawaii right now. These are basically the same exact product. They're manufactured by the same company, but there are two different companies that have distribution rights to different markets. So there is Antix, which is for non-agriculture use. This is primarily for residential area and I believe greenhouses. And then there is the Firefighter, which is agriculture use for like commercial nurseries and farms and such like that. Both of these products are not labeled as OMRI because they have GMO corn grit, not because of anything else. It's only because the actual grit that they use, the carrier is GMO. Some certifying agencies will allow the use of this, no problem. Some may not. It's at their discretion. And so if you guys do work with any kind of certified organic properties, definitely work with their certifying agencies to talk about whether or not either one of these will be allowed. The challenges that we face, the challenges faced for organic is across the board. I mean, with us at the Hawaii Ant Lab, with the end users, including you guys in the landscaping industries and manufacturers. So here with us at HOW, some of our biggest challenges is we have to fight every day to come up with experimental use permits in order to use and test these products and these active ingredients, to be able to test new uses for organic products or organic products that are not necessarily registered for use as insecticides. We have limited research facilities and equipment. Study sites, we have a really hard time finding study sites to be able to do larger field studies. The main reason is because we have a lot of the pressure is for agriculture industry. So we want to be able to provide advice and guidance to people growing food crops, but they, if we're using these experimental products or uses, then often the guidelines with the experimental use permit says we have to destroy the crops. And commercial farmers aren't super into that because that's their livelihood. Understandable. We have a hard time finding additional products to be able to test. We test things and we test them multiple times, and then we kind of exhaust ourselves. We're constantly finding more things to test, or it's a challenge to find more things to test. New chemicals, something like azadirachtin, which I'll talk in a minute. This is kind of uncharted territory. It's not a new chemical necessarily, but using it as a bait, we don't really know if it would be effective in a bait. It's been effective in other uses, and we want to try to be able to harness the efficacy of that product or that chemical into something that's going to be beneficial for ant control, and especially little fire ant control. Trying to get cooperation from chemical manufacturers can be challenging, and also time and funding. We have limited time. We're even more limited on our funding. With end users, you guys are limited to, you're only able to use products that are actually registered in Hawaii. And that have appropriate labeling for the use that you want to use it as. Sometimes that requires getting special local needs labeling, and that takes legislation and working with chemical companies in the EPA, and that can take some time, which includes chemical manufacturer cooperation. Trying to decipher what is real and what is just rumor on the internet. When people ask you what is an effective organic treatment, it is very challenging because there's so much rumor. And within that rumor, there's a rice grain of fact in there. Trying to decipher what's rumor and what's fact is very challenging for you guys.
Hey, Michelle, just to let you know, we're a little bit over on time. So,
oh, okay, are we?
Yeah, we're 5:05. I know we started a little bit late, so I'll give you a little extra time, but just be aware of that. There's some stuff we.
Okay, I'll kind of, whoops, sorry. I'll breeze through and try to skip through some kind of stuff.
Hey.
Like I was saying, the azadirachtin. So this is a kind of a new active ingredient that's coming on. This is through neem. It is the active ingredient in neem. It's both a growth regulator and an anti-fedant. We don't know if it's suitable for baits. So we are trying to test this stuff out. There's a difference between cold pressed neem oil and the clarified neem oil. So if you guys are looking for any kind of like insecticidal properties, you want to make sure that it's cold pressed neem. If it's the clarified neem oil, you're basically just using, it's basically crop oil. It's a smotherer, right? There's a few other things that are coming out. So there's been some research with microencapsulating entomopathic fungi. This has been successful in red imported fire ants in some places. I'm not sure if this is actually going to take off. Also, there was some research, recent research in this microencapsulated AITC. This is the chemical in wasabi that gives it that spiciness. And there's been a lot of interest in this particular study recently. So if people ask you about that, it's very interesting stuff. It has to be microencapsulated. I don't know if it would actually work against little fire ants. It would be amazing if those researchers and us could get together and we could figure some stuff out for some testing out here. I don't know if it's going to happen. Abrin and ricin, these are two other very powerful insecticides, naturally derived from various seeds. These are also highly toxic, but there is quite a bit of research actually revolving around these two right now, as well as other botanical extracts. And so if and when these products become available, or there are researchers that have the potential to develop a product that we can test and we can collaborate, we are always open and more than happy to work with them on that. And that was it. If I know I breezed through the last couple slides, but I think you guys pretty much get the gist of it. I don't want to take up your guys' any more of your time than you personally want. So I'm open to any kind of questions right now. I saw there was a few questions up there.
Sure. Yeah. So question and answer, you can either type them through the chat or just unmute yourselves. Do not feel like you need to stick around, but if you're interested in asking questions, please do, and we will stay on for as long as those individuals would like to ask questions. I'm also going to be putting the survey for the webinar in the chat, but I will also be sending the survey to anybody who registered through Eventbrite. If you haven't registered through Eventbrite, just click on the chat and do the survey now. I'm sending it now. Oops. Sending it now. There we go.
I see 9. What is that? 9 chats. Okay, you guys gotta have something for me, and I can't. Apparently I'm a technology baby because I cannot pull up the chat. So
we've got. I'll go through that, and if anybody asks you anything, you'll be able to hear it. But this may be a question you can or can't answer. The county mulch, is it little fire ant free? And that's coming from somebody that's on Big Island.
On Big Island. So I won't ever say that anything is fire ant free. I think that's very important, but the risk is very low. We do actually monitor the green waste facilities on both east and west side of the island. We monitor them, I think, pretty much monthly. And we've been working with the Hawaii Green Waste Products, who actually do the processing and managing of the mulch. We've been working with them for several years now to develop an effective program. We haven't found any ants in the outgoing mulch piles for a few years now. So the risk is low, but I wouldn't consider it zero. I don't think on the Big Island there is anything that is zero risk. So, yeah.
Whoops. Okay. I'll add permissions to the survey. Don't worry. We don't have any other questions through the chat right now.
Were you guys just talking smack?
Hello?
I saw
Hello?
9
Can you hear me?
things.
We've got, let's see. Yeah, we can hear you if you've got a question.
Yeah, sorry, my Zoom cut out for a good chunk of your presentation and I was struggling with my phone service to get back in. But you may have mentioned it or not. Are there any natural predators out here or just in general for the fire ants?
I guess, yeah, the answer is a very clear-cut yes and no. So yes, there are natural predators. There's a lot of things that eat the fire ants. There are probably some pathogens, and there is a recently discovered or a recent introduction of a parasitoid wasp that does infect little fire ants. None of these have had any impact on the population. And so I think that's very important to understand when it comes to biocontrol, is even though there may be some kind of predators, parasitoids, pathogens, it may not be effective for the actual control. So, and in regards to the new introduction of the parasitoid, specifically, this is something that is widespread in its native range and in other introduced ranges, which also it doesn't show any kind of impact on population control.
Thanks for that question.
Yeah. I kind of focused this on the chemical side, especially since there were the credits, the RUP credits involved. But biocontrol does kind of play along and go very like hand in hand with the organic treatments and stuff, for sure.
Any other questions? Right. That's it. So we do have, for more information, you can check out littlefireants.com. Oh, wait, we got a question here. Is alternating Amdro and Antix a good plan?
Yes, because mainly only because Amdro may have application restrictions with the number of times you can use it per year. Antix does not. One thing that everyone should make sure to be aware of when you're using proprietary baits like the granules that you get at the store is if you notice anything with the seals of the container, if it's not properly sealed when you open it up the first time, red flag. If you notice any funky smell coming out of the container, of a freshly opened container, that should be a red flag. Any clumping or anything like that, red flags. If you see anything like that, contact or take it back to the distributor where you bought it from, or contact the company and say, hey, this stuff is not good. This is what I'm looking at, because you don't want to just start applying something that may not even work. And with those granular baits, they're very sensitive to humidity, with temperature, stuff like that. It doesn't matter if it's organic or not, or what product it is. They're all equally sensitive. So make sure seals are intact, it smells fine, and it's not clumpy, and they should all work equally fine.
Great. We had a question over the chat, but it was answered, and it was, do we still offer once a month LFA classes, or does
Yes.
LFA offer classes? And Heather answered that. Yes, you can sign up on the website or give them a call. It's typically the last Friday.
And there's one on the last Friday of this month. Is it next weekend or next week? It might be.
It just started. It looks like, yeah, the 26th is the last Friday of the month. So yeah, next week.
Yep. If you guys are interested in that, we talk about the whole ant biology thing and why our methods work. It's the whys along with the whats.
Great.
So yeah.
Excellent. So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you, James, for taking your time. I know it's late, and it's especially late for Dr. Downer over there in Arizona. So I want to thank everybody.
Thanks for sticking around, Dr. Downer.
And thanks for everybody for coming and participating, and look out for our next announcement for the next webinars, and of course, read the magazine. Aloha.
Take care, you guys.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Michelle.
aloha.
Thank you.